Now that we've looked at how to calculate the unemployment rate and the labor force participation rate, let's look at what is happening in terms of our unemployment and labor force participation rate compared to other countries, and dive deeper into what's happening. So let's start with unemployment. So youth unemployment rates, we can see here, these are 2013, and you can see that in Europe, there is high youth unemployment. In fact, Greece, more than one in every two individuals who are basically high school, college age can't find work. And this is particularly important when we have the youth unemployment rate because it's telling us about whether or not individuals are retiring. So the more that older individuals stay and keep working instead of retiring, the less jobs that are available for younger people. And as people are now needing to stay in their jobs longer in order to have enough money, or as countries raise the retirement ages, which we've seen across Europe, they do that, of course, because it's quite expensive. When people retire, there's often government-associated funding. In the US, that's social insurance. In Canada, we have CPP, or Canada Pension Plan. That's money the government has to spend on retired individuals. So one way governments balance the budget is they actually raise the retirement age. Well, when they do that, then people don't leave the jobs. They don't open them up for the younger people. And so we see higher unemployment rates across Europe for youth. This can also lead to discontent. We've seen protests in France. We've seen riots because if people can't find work, right, they can't buy houses, make a living, they don't tend to get married and have kids. Like, it becomes very problematic society-wise if people can't start on their careers when they graduate high school or college. So let's look at Canada. How are we doing in Canada in terms of our unemployment rate? So you can see here, this of course is 2013 data, and but let's look at current for Canada. So let's go into our stats can. And here we're under unemployment, just like we were in the last video. And we can look at it by age, group, and gender. And before we were looking at the 15 years and over, but we can also look at it by 15 to 24-year-olds. So this would be the high school, college age versus those who are older. So you'll notice the unemployment rate for youth, as we call it, is 11.5%. Contrast that with the unemployment rate for people who are over 25, which is sitting at 4.8%. And like we talked about earlier, in a much earlier video, which would people rather hire? Would they rather hire someone who is in high school or college, doesn't have the skills and degrees, or someone who's already been working in the industry, has all that education and training, right? You'd rather hire someone who's older. And so we can see that discrepancy here with the unemployment rate at 11.5% for youth and 4.8% for those who are over 25. All right, let's go back to our data. Before we leave that though, just recall that the unemployment rate for Canada is 5.7% as of August 2019. And it was basically 5.7% July of 2019. So if we go back to our slides here, we can see the breakdown by province. So the unemployment rate in July for all of Canada was 5.7%, and then you can see it broken down here. Newfoundland, New Brunswick, PEI have the highest unemployment rates. BC has a much lower one. In fact, BC tends to have very stable unemployment rates. They don't see the big fluctuations that provinces like Alberta see. So we see much bigger swings from boom to bust. We have a lot more volatility in our labor market. And right now we're sitting at an unemployment rate of 7% as of July. And you can find more current information by going to Stats Canada. You can see that over the years, the unemployment rate has been falling So you can see it is on the decline countrywide. And so if you go back to 2015, you see an unemployment rate countrywide over 7%. And so we're talking about basically a little mini recession during that period of time when oil prices fell dramatically, and that impacted us countrywide. We're still feeling the effects of that in Alberta, which is why we have a higher unemployment rate. BC, who has much more of a service industry based economy rather than energy, has a lower unemployment rate at 4.4. Manitoba, Ontario, they do more manufacturing, and you can see their unemployment rates are sitting about 5.8, 5.7. When the Canadian dollar is extremely strong, those Manitoba and Ontario unemployment rates tend to be higher because they're exporting a lot of what they're manufacturing, and so it's dependent on how much it costs those other countries to buy from us. All right, so let's look at some unemployments across countries. So we said in 2019, we're currently sitting at an unemployment rate of 5.7. If we look at 2017 data, you can see that Canada was sitting at about 6.5%. And how does that compare to other countries? Well, you can see the US was at 4.4. Remember, you have to make that 1% adjustment. So 5.5 would be the adjustment to compare Canada to the US. But you can also see other countries. Now notice Vanuatu has an unemployment rate of 1.7%. Remember we talked about Vanuatu at the beginning of the semester. What type of economy was Vanuatu? Well, first, what were the 4 types of economies? Command, custom, cooperation, competition. All right. And so Vanuatu was what type of economy? Well, because of the type of economy it is, because you do the jobs that your parents did, there tends to be very low to no unemployment, and we can see that here. Countries that are seeing political turmoil, war, Libya, Afghanistan, and Iraq, much higher unemployment rates. We can dig deeper into who the unemployed are. So Canada-wide, we see that the group, if we look at people who identify as male, people who identify as female, and those who are under 25, the largest group of unemployed are men. This is actually a residual of what we call the man session of 2008. So if I can just bear with me while I scroll through some slides here. Find where I put that slide. All right, where's my man session slide? Where is that slide? So these are slides we're going through in a moment, but I'm just trying to find my man session slide. Oh, wow. Maybe my man session slide must have been in a previous level. So in other words, in 2008, sorry about that. So in 2008, what we saw is that most of the jobs that were lost, and then just offhand, I think it was like 85% of the jobs that were lost during that 2008-2009 recession were to men. So this would be automobile manufacturing. This would be work in the oil industry. And those jobs didn't all come back. The jobs that were growing during the 2008-2009 recession were jobs in nursing, in education, in financial services. And these jobs are more predominantly women. So what that means is that men were had a greater impact or greater impacted by that recession. And so that's been continuing throughout, is that the jobs that continue to be lost by automation, not being replaced during downturns, tend to more adversely affect men than women. Well, let's look at Alberta. So this is Canada-wide. Let's dig in and look at Alberta. So we can actually go to what is called the labor force statistics of Alberta. You can just Google labor force statistics Alberta, and you can find the most recent, what they call public package. And right now, August 2019 is the most recent data. But every month they put out this document that summarizes what's happening to the labor force in Alberta. So you can see the labor force, the number of people in the labor force, the number of people employed, the number of people unemployed, and the unemployment rate. So it looks like the unemployment rate has actually been increasing in Alberta. And we can look at the breakdown by age and gender. So you can see in the blue, the 15 to 24, again, that's going to be higher than those over 25. We can also look at gender, blue being male, so you can see a higher unemployment rate for men than women. And we can even look at it, but we can look at unemployment by geographic region. So we can see Red Deer here, and you can compare that, of course, towards Fort McMurray and other areas. What's interesting with Red Deer is because we do oil support services, our unemployment rate tends to go up first before you see the unemployment rate go up in Fort McMurray. So when the oil industry is cutting back on production, they stop the support services first, right? You don't need to buy extra storage and equipment if you're going to stop your expansion. So the unemployment rate tends to go up first in Red Deer, and then it'll go up in Fort McMurray. The same thing is true when we're going the other direction. Red Deer unemployment rate falls first as those oil industries pick up because they are going to be buying additional equipment for expansion, and then they start doing more production up north. So the unemployment rate in Red Deer will fall before the one in Fort McMurray falls. So when we look at this, it's a bit tough to look at because that high unemployment number in Red Deer compared to other areas isn't the greatest sign for the Alberta economy. All right, let's go back to our slides. So we looked at who the unemployed are. We can also look at labor force participation rates by whether people identify themselves as male or female. So what we have here is a higher labor force participation rate for men than women. But notice that the labor force participation rate for men is declining, while for women it's been increasing and then kind of flattening out. And this is because if we go back in time, right, more women are going to work. We now have two wage earners in a household because of the high expenses of living. But we also have more men who are staying at home and taking care of the kids. And so this is going to be affecting that labor force participation rate. We can also look at the workforce itself. And you can see in terms of the people who are working, about 47.7% identify as female and about 52.3% identify as male. We talked a little bit about the unemployment rate. This is a slide I was looking for before. This is the unemployment rate of men and women. And you can see that that male unemployment rate is higher. You see that big spike here. So that's at man session. And the number, was 82% of jobs lost, and that's coming out of the US due to the recession. So you can see how the unemployment rate of men went up during that recession much more than women. And while the jobs that are predominantly female have recovered, the male jobs have not as much.